Hello, Year 9. My name, of course, is Mr. Boff, and in this video, we are deconstructing, turning our attention to week 12 in the exam preparation booklet. And you'll see, and indeed you might have already noticed if you've looked ahead, that week 12 is different from the previous 2 weeks in that now we are producing an exam style response to an exam style question. And the question being posed, which is compare how Jesse Pope presents conflict in Who's for the Game with one other poem you have studied, that task, that question, is virtually identical to the one that you will be completing in your actual end of year exams. So effectively, the question or the task is designed so that you can compare the given poem, and in this example, the given poem is Who's for the Game. You can compare that to any of the other poems studied in 3.1, the conflict poetry scheme of learning and booklet. Now, today, to keep things focused and more straightforward for you, so I can give you lots of help, we're going to be comparing Who's for the Game to Dulce et Decorum Est. Now, I'm making no promises, I'm giving you no guarantees. You don't know what the given poem is going to be on the day. This is preparing you really for the same sort of process that you'll be experiencing in year 10 when you do your poetry aspects of your GCSE in English literature. So you need a working knowledge of all of the poems in the 3.1 conflict poetry cluster. Okay, today we're going to go with Who's for the Game being compared to Dulce et Decorum Est. So, what do you mean by compare? Well, what we mean is following a very clear and definite structure to our poetry comparison response. Now, the comparison part is important, but in some ways it's not as important as your detailed literary word level analysis. So, yes, we are comparing, but as I will make clear to you, make plain to you in a moment, we're also engaging in detailed individual analysis of the given poem, whether it's Who's for the Game or whatever, and another poem from the poetry cluster that you've looked at, the conflict poems. So the structure is as follows. First paragraph, comparative overview or overview comparison, overall comparison of both poems. In this example, it's going to be Who's for the Game, overall compared to Dulce et Decorum Est. Remember, the focus of the task is their presentation of conflict. More on the word conflict in a minute, but that's what we're thinking about. So overall, in Who's for the Game and Dulce et Decorum Est, how are those poems overall presenting or depicting, portraying conflict? Then, when we've done that overall comparison, and I'll give you sentence scaffolds for all of this, we then actually compare the titles. The title, Who's for the Game, the title, Dulce et Decorum Est. So we've got two titles there, and the titles themselves signal really a great deal about what the poems have to say and their broader messages about the nature of conflict, as well as the purpose, if you will, of the poems. Once we've compared the titles, we would then move on to individual analysis of quotations, perhaps two from Who's for the Game, and then we would shift over to analysis of two quotations and obviously how conflict is depicted through language, through structure within those two quotations from, in this case, Dulce et Decorum Est. We then draw everything together with a final conclusion, really consisting of a single sentence, where we draw our comparison back together. Okay, overall, both poems are getting us to reflect upon as readers, this particular aspect of conflict. Right. Now, conflict. Conflict is, when we think of conflicts, we probably automatically go to thinking about wars and guns and maybe trench warfare and killing and violence. And that's understandable and that's perfectly valid. However, we know that conflict has a broader range of meanings than that. And therefore, our understanding of conflict and the ways in which these poems that we've studied explore conflict needs to also consider that word conflict in a much broader sense, okay, and also in a more detailed sense. So, conflict. Conflicts can be internal, it can be psychological, a kind of psychological struggle within a character that obviously and often involves emotional conflict, conflicted emotions, mixed feelings. But it can also be conflict at a moral level, conflict in terms of one's conscience or sense of right and wrong, ethical and moral conflict within the individual, and that can often manifest itself as conflict over what is the right decision to make in this particular situation. That conflict, though, can then also take place between people. And that's what the word interpersonal means. Inter, as a word forming element, means between or among. So interpersonal conflict is rather straightforwardly conflict between or among people. Now, this can manifest itself as tension or struggle between individuals or groups, for example. And these, in turn, can be demonstrated through arguments, clashes, rivalry, or perhaps more obviously, violence. But then we can also have conflict at the war level, at the societal level, and we can have conflict in the realm of ideas and systems of belief, or what we might term ideological conflict. So, yes, of course, conflicts between societies, between nation states, we're thinking of war, but we can also have conflicts between belief systems or ideas about war itself. There is, in a sense, therefore, an ideological conflict between the ways in which Who's for the Game depicts conflict and war and the ways in which Dulce et Decorum Est depicts conflict and war. So there is kind of conflict explored within the poems, but even the two poems could be said to be in a form of conflict with one another. So, what's going on with our comparative overview? The comparative overview is the introduction to our essay, where we're laying out overall, here's the two poems, here's where there is moments of similarity overall, but also crucially, and especially the case between Who's for the Game and Dulce, these two poems are very different. They're markedly different, particularly in how they treat and depict conflict. And then we're thinking about, well, why are they so different? How are they so different? And our introduction, our comparative overview, is going to look something like this in terms of sentence scaffolds. So, first sentence you're going to be writing for homework. First paragraph. Both Who's for the Game and Dulce et Decorum Est present conflict as. As what? As a force that shapes society, that shapes perceptions of conflict itself, that shapes the lives of individuals. It's a really powerful force. However, we know that Who's for the Game characterizes conflict as a game, as a source of entertainment, a source of enjoyment. It's also something we should consider our duty, particularly our duty as men. So conflict is something that is linked to ideas around patriotic pride, nationalism, and even at its most extreme end, something like jingoism. On the other hand, and as you can see, the structure of that second sentence allows us to hold up the differences between Who's for the Game and Dulce. While Who's for the Game does this and characterizes conflict in this way, Dulce et Decorum Est conveys a notion that conflict is viscerally brutal, destructive, dehumanizing, futile, even. And therefore, in this way, I think the poems cause us as readers to reflect upon the ways in which poetry itself can shape and frame our understanding of conflict and war. The ways in which poetry can both reveal and obscure the nature of conflict. Okay, the poetry is this has this remarkable capacity to shape and frame how we understand things, and in this case, to shape and frame how we understand war and conflict itself. Now, I've written a modelled example, but I have purposefully avoided writing about Who's for the Game and Dulce, because otherwise the temptation will just be to be like, oh, well, Mr. Boff's already done this, so just kind of copy it out. So I've compared Who's for the Game to The Manhunt, the poem by Simon Armitage. There is also a podcast episode all about The Manhunt and Who's for the Game that I want you to be listening to, but more on that in a moment. So, both Who's for the Game and The Manhunt present conflict as a powerful force that shapes the lives of soldiers. However, that's where the similarities end. While Who's for the Game characterizes conflict as a glamorously heroic duty for one's country, The Manhunt, and the sentence structure is highlighting the contrast, that's what however is doing. The Manhunt conveys a notion or idea that conflict inflicts damage upon the body, mind, and indeed interpersonal relationships. In this way, the poems cause readers to reflect upon the ways poetry can conceal, as it does with Who's for the Game, or reveal, as it does with The Manhunt, the brutal truth of war. So, once we've done that, okay, we're now on to the comparison of titles. Let's have a look. The title of Who's for the Game clearly articulates the poem's broader depiction of conflict as. So we're starting with the title of Who's for the Game. We then, as you can see, zoom in to that specific word game, which is really important. It's part of the extended metaphor of war as game that runs all the way through the poem. But Jesse Pope also poses in the title, poses a question. And I think it's a question designed to challenge readers. The implied male reader of the poem, Who's for the Game, as in, are you up for this? To which the answer should surely be, if you are a man, if you are going to fulfill your national duty as a man, I'm up for the game. I'm for the game. So it's in some ways quite a challenging and provocative title, Who's for the Game. It's laying down a sort of gauntlet, and we can probably even, if we're going to push it a little bit further, detect a note of emasculation, or at least the challenging of masculinity. Because if you say, well, who's for the game? I'm not for the game of war. That begs the question, well, what are you for? And what sort of man are you? And I think that that's a very sort of intentional challenge that Pope is sort of laying down there rhetorically. In contrast, okay, and you can use these sentence scaffolds to compare. You should be using them. Dulce et Decorum Est relates to, well, we know it's part of a Latin epigram attributed to the poet Horace. Okay, it's sweet and fitting to die for one's country. We know, though, that in effect, Owen is not saying this with a straight face. That we should be interpreting this title ironically, not taking it at face value. In effect, he is meaning the opposite of what the title suggests. Okay? Because the title serves as part of the poem's broader critique, critiquing the idea that to lay down one's life in war for your country is indeed sweet and fitting. I think by reading the poem Dulce et Decorum Est, the sense is that war and conflict is brutal, it's violent, it's dehumanizing, it's senseless, it's futile, it's kind of ineffectual, okay? It is bloody, kind of disgusting and repellent is the general sense, okay? There's nothing noble about it whatsoever. And bearing in mind Owen's, kind of personal, intimate acquaintance with the horrors of trench warfare, as well as obviously his tragic death right at the end of World War I, that kind of looms over the poem. Now, again, I've written an example, but I'm not comparing Who's for the Game to Dulce as you are for homework. I'm comparing it to The Manhunt. And you can see, I'm not going to read the full thing out to you in the interest of time, but this is what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is following that structure. I'm following the sentence scaffolds. I'm starting out with that kind of broad comment about the title, and then I'm examining the micro word level detail. The process of literary analysis, generally speaking, is from the macro, the broad analysis, to the micro, the individual word level and phrase level analysis. And the more we can connect those two to move convincingly and confidently from the micro broad analysis, the macro broad analysis, to the micro fine grained detail, individual word choice and what have you, the more we can do that, the better, because that's the kind of literary analysis we want to be producing. So, homework expectations. I'm not asking for a full comparative essay of the sort you'll be actually delivering in the exam. I'm asking for 2 paragraphs, and every single sentence I've given you as scaffolding. You are writing your comparative overview, overall comparing Who's for the Game to Dulce, then comparing the title of Who's for the Game to Dulce et Decorum Est. Use the sentence scaffolds provided. They are there as guidance. They are there to ensure you can be successful, but they also take away a bit of the mental load. They let you think about your ideas and what you want to say and take away a bit of the hard work and difficulty and perhaps challenge of thinking, how can I start this? How can I articulate it in that formal academic way that I know that I need to do? And then, as I'm recording this on the 23rd of May, in terms of further help and support, by the time you get this video, by the time you're actually doing this task, you are going to have podcast episodes about all of the poems studied in the previous half term, okay, in 3.1 in that poetry cluster. As the time of recording, the 23rd of May, you have one on the manhunt, one on Who's for the Game, and one on Dulce et Decorum Est. The other poems, particularly those that relate to conflict in Ireland and Northern Ireland, there will also be associated podcasts. They are freely available. There's no paywall or anything like that. They're on their own website. They're on Spotify. They're on Apple Podcasts. And they are also now on YouTube too. In fact, on YouTube, it's probably the easiest way to access them because they're gathered in a single playlist. So make sure on the Tuesday, your teacher will be saying, right, class, year 9, get your exam preparation booklets out. Let's have a look at the work that you've produced. I want to see your comparative overview. I want to see your title comparison. Maybe they'll do some live marking. And also, if you see me on Tuesday, it kind of works well because at lunchtime, I have lunch duty on the year 9 yard. Come and see me. Come and show me your work. I'll be happy to mark it. Have a look at what you've done. Come and find me throughout the course of the school day. Or over the course of the week, because I want to see what you've done. I also have lunch duty on a Friday. Again, same location. Come and show me what you've done in terms of your revision on a Friday lunchtime as well, because I want to see what you're doing. Hopefully these videos are helpful. Hopefully the podcasts are helpful as well. Okay, any questions, any difficulties, any challenges, speak to your class teacher or come and speak to me and we'll do our best to help you. Okay, as always, thank you so much for watching and happy revising.